Friends, colleagues, listeners, here we are. We're still in Geneva. Happy to be here, and this is the week that we would have all been at the World Cargo Symposium, so we're taking the opportunity to speak to some key parties of IATA, and we've got a very, very key member of IATA here today, Brian Pearce, the Chief Economist of IATA, 16 years veteran, and here's a man who's probably seen it all and thought he knew almost everything that could happen. And now we're in another situation that requires his expert thinking. So, Brian, thank you very, very much for coming on.
My pleasure.
And I know how popular you are and how much demand there is on your time. So we'll keep this one very, very short. But a few key questions. What do you think's happening now at the moment, Brian?
Well, we're seeing pretty much unprecedented collapse in air travel. I mean, the big damage is being done by government restrictions on travel, as well as obviously the fear of the coronavirus, COVID-19, amongst the travelling public. And so, you know, we've actually seen a pretty much unprecedented collapse in scheduled air travel. I think it's the steepest fall I've seen. I mean, certainly since the global financial crisis, and you know, on some measures, it's actually looking worse than the global financial crisis.
And the fear element, obviously, is driving an awful lot because there seems to be some knee-jerk responses from governments and politicians, and then there's delays, and then there's speculation and people blaming people for not acting quick enough. It's a very difficult situation for everybody to be in.
It is difficult, and certainly we respect government actions to try to contain this virus. But I do think that we need to see more coordination. The lack of coordination, the very different measures being put in place is making it extraordinarily difficult for airlines just operationally. But as I say, we respect the fact that governments need to take measures to try to contain the virus. I think one of the issues that needs to be considered is the economic fallout, because air transport, we know from the cargo industry that we are critical to the modern economy.
Exactly.
Air cargo transports a third of international trade. Most of that is components. We are seeing a lot of factory closures as a result, because of those supply chains just can't operate without good air transport services. So there is a trade-off here.
Yeah, there is indeed. Now, I mean, just on a personal note, and not by any educated means at all, but it's good when you see politicians and governments accepting and understanding the fallout that's going to be experienced by most of the public. So, sickness at work, because obviously if people have to work and they don't get sickness, they'll go in when they're ill. There's all different means of support. That, I think, is fantastic, okay? But the coordination and the collaboration is something that's lacking. Now, the full impact of the situation, you've obviously, you've done your homework. Where do you think that is now? And what would you have been saying if we were at the World Cargo Symposium?
Well, I mean, obviously, the first thing to say is, our heart goes out to the people that are suffering from COVID-19. I mean, this is obviously a terrible situation, and one of the roles of the cargo business is to get the pharmaceuticals, get the medicines to where they're needed. So it's critical that we do see those cargo flights maintained in order to supply the medical facilities and the masks that the doctors need. That's the critical thing. But there's a big financial fallout as well, and I think that is important, because we want, from a public point of view, a government point of view, you want to maintain those air transport services for when we're through this episode. And at the moment, airlines are facing a liquidity crisis because revenues have just collapsed. We did a couple of scenarios a week ago, and we're already at the worst case, where we thought there'd be something like $113 billion of revenue lost this year, which would be sort of 20% of the industry's sales. It's looking as if it could be at least that, if not more.
More probably if it carries on the way it is. I mean, some of the carriers, the reports are absolutely frightening.
Well, absolutely. I mean, bookings have just collapsed. particularly, Europe is at the moment is where I guess the big outbreak is, and a lot of the measures taking place. We've just seen the North Atlantic close for business by the Americans, we've seen bookings for European airlines fall precipitously. As I say, even in the financial crisis, we didn't see a decline as big as this.
Yeah, no, it's incredible. Now, with everything that's obviously terrible, and we're in a concerned situation at the moment, there's always the cycle. Something starts to come a little bit good. Now, again, just from what I'm seeing in China, it looks like things are getting a little bit more under control, and obviously people are going back. Manufacturing is starting to start up again. How long do you see for that to start to come into practice for everybody else to experience?
Well, you're right, and the experience we've had in all the past pandemics, and COVID-19 is now a pandemic. We've seen a V shape. We've seen a dramatic collapse for a few months, and then travellers and the cargo businesses has typically come back to where it was before. We're seeing that happening in China, partly because of the dramatic measures they took to control the virus. China is getting back to work. That's really important because 18% of manufacturing takes place in China. That is a lot of supply chains around the world depend on China. I think the cargo business could actually see a recovery earlier than the passenger business, and actually it needs to, in order to support those jobs and economic activities. But I think even if we see a V-shaped profile to the business, we've seen this virus become a regional Asian issue to a global issue. So we've got an extended period, I think, of weakness still in many markets.
Yeah, and I mean, nobody can say what's going to happen. But what have you guys looked at any sort of forecasting of where you think the recovery would come?
Well, if COVID-19 follows the pattern of previous disease outbreaks, you would expect to see a recovery after 6 to 9 months. China's sort of following that pattern. It looks as though that might happen in China. But as I say, I think the fact that we've seen this spread globally and we're starting to see outbreaks in centres around the world, even if we do see a V-shape, globally that's going to be extended for a much longer period than we've seen in the past. So I think the industry is in a crisis situation. It's in a liquidity crisis in particular at the moment.
Yep.
It's going to need help. It will be temporary. But the challenge, I think, for the industry and for governments is that during that temporary hit, because it's so big, we could see a lot of failures.
And on that grounds, and with all your members and all your government interface, etc., is there anything now exceptional being done collectively, globally, to protect or to let some of the carriers or some of the organisations that are suffering associated have a longer breathing space or at least recovery time?
So IATA is mobilising its lobbying forces and advocates with other associations as well. We are approaching governments around the world to seek support, just to keep the air transport system going, because this will finish and we'll need those rapid air transport links in the future. But the industry is bleeding cash at the moment, and it needs support.
Yeah. Now, when you look at history and you then look at things that are similar but obviously more advanced, personally, I question some of the foresight or some of the learning from the past, and so much risk assessment hasn't been done. Business continuity, contingency plans. To see so many people scrambling now to come up with an effective 4, 5, 6 milestone phases seems disappointing that things like that weren't planned in advance. So has IATA got any plans now, so maybe the next World Cargo Symposium, to do a complete exercise or section with regards to sustainability, continuity, and making sure correct risk platforms are put in place?
Well, there's always more that you can do, and there's always things that you learn from each crisis. I'd say that the air transport industry is pretty well prepared for these sorts of shocks, because unfortunately we're faced with them. Every 10 years or more, we get hit by another shock. So actually, we've got a whole stack of guidance for ground services, for cabin crew, in the event of a disease outbreak, how to handle passengers, how to handle cargo. We work very closely with the World Health Organization in helping to put this guidance and regulation together. So I think the air transport industry has been pretty well prepared in terms of processes to deal with this sort of thing. But I'm sure that we'll be doing once we get through this, we'll be doing a thorough review of what we can do better next time. Yeah,
no, exactly. And some of the points that you would have been covering in Istanbul, and obviously everybody fully appreciates, if not then, they do now, the good decision it was to cancel the conference. The presentations that you were going to be giving, are they available now for people to start to look at? When will they be available?
Well, I think many of them, of course, have been overtaken by events. So keep an eye on the IATA website, and also there's an IATA economic research app where we're publishing information on how we see the COVID-19 affecting both the passenger business and the cargo business.
Okay, very good. And is there anything now, you with your personal experience, is there anything that you would give us as advice to people who are out there now? And I don't mean solving the problem, but what should they be focusing on now straight away?
I think it's risk assessment. Flying is still safe. We've got extremely good air circulation systems, but I think at the moment we're all focused on the crisis rather than the recovery phase. I think it's really a matter of many businesses looking for survival. So I think it's a matter of taking unnecessary costs out of the business and talking to your suppliers as well to seek better terms. We are talking to governments to seek financial relief, but it's getting through this immediate liquidity crisis that's the key challenge.
It is amazing, isn't it? I mean, looking out here now at the mountains and the aircraft on the stands, you look at each aircraft, you don't realise how many circles of business go round it, and then it's like ripples in a pond, and so many companies and so many.
Yep, and many of those aircraft you can see out there today are parked because they can't be used. There's not the demand, and they're very expensive assets, often with fixed interest and debt repayments due. That's the challenge.
Yeah, which is why the whole industry now needs to come together and just take a bit of the pain for a period of time.
Exactly. I mean, I think we're looking to work with the whole supply chain. We're all in this together. I think, it's not just the airlines.
Exactly.
It's freight forwarders, it's everybody else in the chain that serves the modern economy. And we need to work together to get through this.
Yeah, no, tough times. But the lobbying, I'm sure, will make a big difference, and making everybody feel part of one team rather than looking after their own position, which is something that needs to be done.
Absolutely.
Brian, thank you so much.
Pleasure.
I know how busy you are. I know you're getting ready to shoot off, and you're in hot demand. So good luck with everything, and touch wood for everybody in the industry. Things will get better sooner than anybody expects.
Yeah, I hope so.
Thank you very, very, very much indeed.